you? I think you've got a bit of background info.
Yeah, so a very warm welcome tonight for the second time to our HorseTribe webinars to Georgia Plimbley. So Georgia is a horse trainer and she's focusing and specialising on Liberty at the moment, but you've got years of experience as a stunt rider as well, haven't you? You began riding a very long time ago when you were the age of 2, and like many of us had a very typical pony club background, didn't you? But
yeah,
this chance stunt riding lesson when you were challenged by a friend of yours was the thing that ignited your passion and your future career. So you've worked with lots of different companies such as the Devil's Horseman and Ben Atkinson, who many will have heard of. And you've worked on lots of TV shows and films, a lot of which you can't tell us about, but a lot of which you're very, very proud of and can. And you've worked all around the world as a stunt rider. So it's this that you're drawing on tonight, and we'll find out a little bit more about. So welcome tonight, and we're really looking forward to hearing about how to ride and fall safely.
We are indeed. And I've got to tell the story before we start, because last Friday I was talking to Georgia and writing some notes for the webinar tonight in the morning, and in the afternoon I went riding, and despite having had a brilliant conversation with Georgia about what to do if you fall off, I ignored all of it. Hence I've got a slightly black eye and a slightly blue yellow face. So I am really excited to find out more. I'm sure next time I listen, this time I listen properly and actually do something with the information. So I've got your slides, Georgia, so I'll move them on as you like. Just let me know. And guys, it's being recorded like normal. If you have got questions, just type them straight into the Q&A whenever you've got them, and Thea and I will either ask them in the moment if it seems appropriate, or we'll wait till the end and we'll ask Georgia questions on the end. But we're also going to talk through this webinar rather than switching ourselves off, so it'll be a little bit more interactive. So Georgia, over to you.
Great, thank you ladies for such a lovely introduction. I feel like I've got nothing else to introduce myself about now. That was lovely. But yes, my name's Georgia Plimbley. Nowadays I'm a natural horsemanship trainer. I'm really passionate about Liberty training, but my background is stunt riding, and I've done that for very many years. And as a stunt rider, a very natural part of that career is that you have to learn to fall off a horse safely. It's one of the very first things you do. And I'd ridden for very many years before I started stunt riding. And then when I learned this technique, I remember thinking this should be taught just generally, because the concept of falling off is incredibly scary. And it's something that nobody wants to fall off. But actually a big part of the fear of falling off is the unknown factor of not really knowing what the outcome's going to be. And actually there are lots of things you can do, practical things you can do that can change the outcome of the fall. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah.
So as I've been saying, falling is inevitable. I'm not saying there's a guarantee that as riders we're all going to fall off, but it's a high risk sport, and there is a high likelihood that at some point in your riding journey you're going to fall off the horse. I think you ladies have both said you've had quite a few falls in your day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I read some research, Georgia, that said we are on average in the UK, and it was research with not far off 4,000 people taking part, that we're likely to fall off once every 18 months. So it is a good topic to cover tonight for that reason.
A really good topic to cover. And they say statistically it's every 250 falls. So that doesn't sound so bad, but every 250 falls an individual has, one of those is likely to be a highly severe and life-changing injury. So if I think about how many times I've fallen off, I think I've probably fallen off more than 250 times in all the years that I've been doing it. And certainly for those of us whose careers are professionals, or we ride every day, you are going to, you can find yourself, it can be something that happens quite a lot. So yeah, the statistics are there and they do follow it. So I don't know if could we pop on to the next slide just so I can go through what we'll. Oh, sorry, I meant the one before. I've skipped ahead a little bit.
Oh.
Oh, no, we haven't. I'm so sorry, ladies. Okay, there we go.
That's me. I put it in the wrong order. That should have gone first.
No, there you go. This is what I wanted to get to. So For me, it seems really, really strange that we don't have more discussions around the fact that there's a lot more we can do to educate riders. And this is what I feel is a vital component that has been absent, that can make a difference in the outcome of the fall, and that is the education regarding fall safety. Now, interestingly, if you go to jockey school or you train to be a jockey, it's a very, very strong part of the syllabus. And as we all know, we see when we watch the racing, jockeys fall left, right and centre, and they bounce back up and they get off and often walk away. That isn't always the case. And I do have to sort of stress a disclaimer that there are no techniques that are completely foolproof, and there is nothing I can say that would absolutely guarantee anyone's safety, but there are things we can do to reduce that chance of a fall. So tonight we're going to really talk about mindset and how the actual fear of falling off can inform how you're riding your horse, and just how you handle different situations on your horse can increase the chance of you falling and not. We're going to look at how to handle different situations. So in particular, if your horse is rearing, bucking, bronking, bolting, how you can actually deal with those difficult situations, what you can do to combat them, or different behavioral issues. And then we're actually going to talk about falling itself, things that you absolutely shouldn't do. So for example, it's very natural to put your hand out when you're falling, but if you put your hand out, you're much more likely to break your wrist or your arm. And then I'm going to go through the falling technique that we'd look for, and hopefully be demonstrating a few exercises people can do at home. Very simple, it doesn't matter your ability or your physicality or anything like that, but some exercises that you can go away and work on, which will help with your muscle memory and just hopefully help people take in their head. If you do it a lot, a good thing people say is if you do it every night before bed, you just get down, do these exercises. It helps just integrate this natural feeling into your body, that you know the sort of position to go for if you're going to fall off. And then finally, we're going to talk a little bit about the strength and conditioning element and how that's quite important. Just if you have a good core and a good seat, you're less likely to fall off because you're going to have better balance and stability in the saddle. So yes, that's what we're looking at covering this evening.
Brilliant. Do you want me to go back to the previous one about falling off is inevitable, or onto the next?
Yes, I think it's a really interesting thing is that because I mean, it's very natural. It's natural that everybody's afraid of falling off. Again, there's this element of the unknown, because if you don't know how to deal with a fall, you're much more likely to be fearful of it. It seems strange to me that in other sports, for example, gymnastics, they teach a gymnast how to get out of bad situations and how to safely fall from an apparatus or from equipment. So it seems nonsensical that in riding, when falling in some, it is an inevitability at some point. If you're going to ride a lot, it's part and parcel of the sport. It seems very natural that you should take responsibility as a rider of educating yourself as to how to handle those falls in a good way. So yes, I think that's a really interesting way to think about it, because, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but if you're in the saddle and you're thinking about falling off, and even subconsciously, a lot of nervous riders, they're nervous about their horse's behavior, or they might be nervous that their horse is spooking, or they might be nervous that their horse is behaving in a certain way, but ultimately their fear is there because they don't want to ultimately fall off the horse. And so it informs the whole way that they're riding and the mindset that they're riding. And if we can take away that fear of falling, or at least alleviate that fear a little bit, it's going to improve your confidence in the saddle and improve your whole riding experience.
And I just, before we move perhaps off that slide, we've got a picture of someone show jumping and falling, but I think it's probably important to say that falling can happen anywhere, can't it? Hacking, schooling, pootling in the school, anything, can't it? It's not just about competing.
Oh gosh, yes, there's no hard and fast rules, but the good thing about the techniques about falling is they're quite simple, really. When we get to them, there's just a few key things that you can do, but that will in all likelihood massively change the outcome. And in this picture, it's like a fantastic example, the fact that the girl probably quite of a good reflex. She's put her arm out there to try and stop her fall. But what we're seeing in that picture is quite contrary to what we're going to be looking for later. We're talking about the fall technique.
Yeah. Right.
Great. Oh.
That's a fantastic little clip you found there. Oof, that's a good duck out, isn't it?
I can put my hands up. That
Go
is
on, reveal it.
That is me. That is me.
Yeah.
And
wow.
You might not be able to see, you see I've gone like this because and I've covered my head. Yeah, I've also got a Christmas jumper on because it was the Christmas show. It's supposed to be fun.
Well, actually, I know we're going to come to the full position, but that brace of your hands coming up to your head, and that's actually a part of the technique. So fantastic, like 5 stars there. That's really good.
And look how naughty he is when he kicked out.
To be fair, my air jacket had gone off, and I think that was just a natural reaction to what's that like? Bless him.
But yeah, so why are people afraid of falling? The fact that falling off does feel like a failure. Something that I find really interesting as a stunt rider is we're taught to essentially duck out all the time to save ourselves. And now I've actually built a habit of, if I'm in any kind of uncomfortable situation, I'm so comfortable falling off that I kind of throw myself off my horse to get out of situations, probably more than is necessary. And quite a funny story, I was out drag hunting a couple of years ago on my stallion, and we were jumped over there was a bar, like a style I was going to say a style jump. There was a style, and we jumped it, and it was so wet as we went into the jump, and he took off, and I just had this gut feeling he's going to land on his knees and go over. I just felt like he wasn't going to land well. So I threw myself mid-jump off and ended up falling into the mud. And he ended up landing the jump perfectly and turning around and looking at me like, what are you doing on the floor? And I think everybody thought, wow, I'm really surprised she didn't stick that, because it was a nice jump. But in reality, I darted out because I thought I'd be safer to fall off than to stay on, but I just misjudged the situation. But yeah, I think so there's quite an interesting takeaway there that I come from a very different background of equestrianism, but in what I do, there is absolutely no shame in falling off, and it's what we're taught to do to stay safe. And I think that there's something there that if people fall off, I see it often when I'm out competing. Somebody will fall, can get very emotional, they'll get up and walk away, but there's a lot of emotion tied to falling off, and then often the experience of falling can leave a rider with a sense of trauma and fear of getting back on. And there's also this idea I was taught this from a very early age, like no matter what happens, stick your bum in that saddle and you do not leave that saddle. And actually this can be quite a problematic idea, because again, there are some situations where you're actually safer to get out of the saddle and to get away from the horse. For example, when we look at rotational falls, the best thing you can do if your horse it's a very quick movement, of course, but if a horse is going to fall rotationally, the best thing you can do is get away, off and away from the horse. It's actually a dive roll that we teach riders to do, a dive roll out to the side, which sounds extremely scary, but the point is it gets you away from the horse and into a safe place. And again, there's this idea that we have to stick on, but actually forcing ourselves in that saddle and trying to stay in the saddle isn't always the best thing to do to stay safe. And of course, why are people afraid of falling? We fear getting hurt. Well, this is hopefully something we're going to address, and hopefully everybody can, after this webinar, go away feeling that they've got a few ideas, a few things they can go away and work on that will just give them that little bit more confidence that if they are going to fall off, that they'll be able to handle it or hopefully improve the outcome of that fall. And I mean, I love that video. I'm sorry, I should have said it again. It would just maybe one more time, but
it was classic.
You were sat in such a good position as well. Like you're sat back, and then no.
I could feel him backing off a bit, but then he was just absolutely, he's like white planks now.
No. Did you get back on?
I did get back on and I jumped, yeah.
Fantastic.
This isn't me.
So obviously injuries can't always be prevented when we fall off, but there is a lot of research done in how the rigidity in your body can actually, that in itself can make it more likely to have injuries. So if you're in the saddle and you're stressed, you're nervous, you're fearful, and you're anticipating that you're going to fall and hit the ground, the likelihood of the outcome of the fall is going to be worse. And this is all comes down to riding with tension. And this is where mindset in riding is really, really important. I've definitely, as a horse trainer, I definitely see a vicious cycle of nervous horses and nervous people. And I don't know if you ladies have seen this yourself or experienced it, where a horse and a rider, as a combination, the horse will be very nervous, but then a very different rider can get on and the horse is absolutely fine. And this can be quite a tricky subject to handle with people with their own horses, because it takes quite a lot of self-acceptance to realize that actually your nervousness and your fear of the environment and your fear that the horse might be spooky or that the horse is going to do something you don't like, that feeling is actually what your horse is mirroring back at you, and that feeling is often very informative as to what the horse is like underneath you. So just riding with confidence in the saddle feeds your horse and makes the whole riding experience for the two of you a lot more pleasant. So is that a real picture? I can't actually tell if that's like a well.
I think it is a real picture. Well, maybe it's I don't know. It's good though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would not recommend anybody to take that style home.
No.
But that's an absolutely amazing picture.
I think it's a good example of tension, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really, really, really is. So what does the research say? So there's been a lot of research done, particularly in the results of car accidents, but we can look at parallels of this as we can in comparison with horses and falling off your horse. So for example, in a car accident, in a high-speed car collision, there's been a lot of research behind the idea that if somebody is consciously aware of the accident and they're aware that something's happening before it happens, and their body tenses up and they brace themselves against the accident, because all their tissues and their muscles are fixed and rigid, that means that when there's an impact, everything takes the impact because there's no absorption, there's no softness, and there's no movement in the body. And now these studies have shown that people who are not as conscious, so aren't aware that the accident happened. So for example, if the accident happens so quickly, or if they're taken completely unaware, perhaps from the side, because their body is soft and they're almost unprepared and not anticipating an impact, therefore everything moves and flows and goes with the impact of the crash. And so the damage to the tissues, to the muscles, to their body is much reduced. And this can be paralleled directly with falling from a horse. Now I'm going to talk about getting into this position later. We have this tuck and roll that we're going to talk about, and there is a sort of an optimal way you want to hit the ground. But this is, again, I'm trying to key into this mindset that if you have tension, you're more likely to injure yourself. So if you're somebody who sat at home who perhaps lacks confidence in the saddle, or when you're riding, you know that deep down you're really afraid of this idea of falling, you can take charge of that, and you can actually change the likelihood of you falling by getting hold and grappling with that fear and doing something about it. And this is where I think the rider education is so important, and we can all individually as riders take our own responsibility to think, right, I choose to be a horse rider, I choose to ride horses, and I accept that part of that there is a risk of falling, but I also know there's a lot of things that I can do to help myself. And one of those things is to relax, is to be softer in the saddle, to be more secure in myself, and to trust my horse more. And that is such a big takeaway that I really can't stress enough.
Yeah, we did there was a brilliant webinar from Tracy Cole, was it a couple of weeks ago, Heidi? It's available
Yeah.
now, and it'd be a really good one from a mindset point of view if anyone wants to watch that, because she really talks about how to relax yourself and reduce anxiety, which will help with this.
Yeah, I actually had I before I had my son, I rode for quite a long time when I was pregnant, which I know everybody has different opinions on, each to their own. We won't get into that, but I was quite heavily pregnant. I was hacking out one of my stallions, and I was only at this point riding the horses I absolutely trusted. I had him on the buckle, long rein. We'd had a lovely ride, and we were nearly home, and we were down a narrow track with high hedges each way, and a pheasant flew underneath, like under all four legs of the horse, under one way and out the other. And this is a horse that never spooks. He's solid as a rock. If I had to ride into war, he's the horse I'd choose. But I know he also, I would jump myself if that happened to me. And he cat leapt 4 legs in the air. And to this day, I know the way I stayed on. And I mean, I was very heavily pregnant. I think I was about 36 weeks pregnant at the time. And I think the only way that nothing bad came of that was that the fact I was so relaxed. I was long rein on the buckle, enjoying myself, super happy. And my body just completely went with him. I didn't disconnect in any way. I was glued to him. I wasn't glued to him because I was stressed and wanting to be on him and fixed. I was glued to him because we were together, because I was so relaxed into that saddle, like we were connected. And something much worse could have happened. And thankfully I've got my little boys in the next room. Very healthy, and loves horses to bits, so you know, nothing worse came of that. But that's a very good example of that proves this idea that softness and having a good seat, being confident and relaxed, can really change the outcome of things.
This is an example of not being relaxed. I can say that because it's me.
Oh, I think you've actually sat that remarkably well.
Well, the story behind it, I guess, is that this is my very first show on this horse, and I was absolutely terrified. Totally terrified. And I think, personally, having heard what you said, I think if I wasn't so scared, that actually he didn't move that quickly, I would have relaxed into it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he did it. It took him ages to turn.
Yeah. And actually, I don't know if we can watch it again, but if you look at your position as you're approaching the fence, you like you say, you're quite stiff, and then even as you're falling, you're still in that same position, like you're fixed. But were you okay?
Oh, it was fine. It wasn't an example of being hurt at all. I think it's, for me, I just looked and went, oh yeah, that was rigid.
And it's so difficult, and it is very easy for me. Like I'd probably describe as quite an overconfident rider. That's certainly what my mum always said to me when I was a little girl. But it's very easy for me to sit here and say, oh, you know, it's all about mindset and you should relax in the saddle. And I understand for a lot of people that the challenge of having confidence is a really difficult one, and one that can take years. And especially if you have had a particularly bad fall or a traumatic experience, just getting back in the saddle and getting over that trauma of, you know, something's happened, how could that not happen again? It can be very difficult. But I think it's really interesting what you've said about your other speaker a couple of weeks ago. I'm so sorry, her name's surpassed me.
Tracy Cole, yes.
But I think there is, and I'm really glad that in general we're talking a lot more about rider mindset, and there's so many specialists just on, like you say, on the seat, and talking about having the seat and be connected with the horse. And I think it's a really, really positive step in riding, and I think it is massive in terms of increasing your confidence.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, back to basics. Your horse is your mirror. This is falling into my Liberty grounds here, which I wouldn't not be able to mention. But I'm somebody who really, really deeply believes that horses mirror us is quite a simple concept. I've worked with horses my whole life. It's something my family have always hoped I'd move on from, and I wouldn't. And it's something that I always come back to. And again, this can be quite a contentious issue for people who perhaps I see it quite a lot when people project their fears onto the horse. So they might have had an experience, for example, where they've fallen off at some point because of their horses spooked and there were cows in the field. And then from then on, they'll say, well, my horse is afraid of cows. And so they'll be afraid of their horse being afraid of cows. Whereas actually the best gift they could give to that horse is for them to be completely indifferent, for them to be completely nonchalant and very confident about the cows, because your horse needs that from you. And it's very difficult. I think personally, as a horse trainer, we can't expect these horses to have confidence in the environment around them if we don't have confidence on it, because ultimately we've taken them. I mean, they've been domesticated over many years now, but ultimately horses have evolved as a wild being with certain instincts for a very, very long time. And part of that instinct is feeling their herd around them, feeling their instinct to survive is knowing they're safe, and they get that safety from their herd. The horses aren't in herds anymore, and they have us because we buy them and we keep them in stables and turn them out. And so I think people don't realize all the time quite how valuable they are to their horse and how important their feelings are to their horse, because really your horse needs you. Your horse needs you to be confident. Your horse needs you to trust in the world around him. Your horse needs you to trust that he can cope with seeing that cow, and he can cope with going into that indoor arena. Because if you don't believe the horse can do it, he won't believe it either. And I know that sounds maybe quite a cheesy concept, but I genuinely believe it, and it's what I see proven in my training and the practical way I handle horses every day. Yeah, that's an interesting picture actually, because Safi, the mare I'm on there, the lady who I was riding her for had a lot of issues with confidence, and it again was a case of, with different riders the horse was completely different, because she would mirror who was on her back. But yeah, I think that's a nice takeaway. If we can fall without fear, we can ride with confidence. So I'm going to get into a bit later how we actually fall and what techniques there are to reduce that injury aspect. But before that, I want to look at how we can avoid the idea of falling altogether. So I think it would be really helpful. I thought it'd be really helpful for people that we went through some different tricky situations. So we're going to look at rearing, bucking, bronking. Bucking and bronking kind of come under the same umbrella, and bolting. So if your horse does any of these things, or if you're ever in a situation where you experience one of these things, I'm going to sort of talk through how I, as a trainer, how I react to my horse and how I handle those situations. So have we got separate slides for each one? Yeah, we have. Fantastic. So riding a rear. So this is, again, it comes really down to security of your seat, balance in your saddle, because the worst thing you can do if your horse goes up and rears, something that you can see actually in the left-hand picture, that woman is this anybody we know? Okay, I was gonna say, so she's out of balance, and you can see she's actually pulling back on the reins. Now the reins don't look too tense, but the way her arms are pulling back, so to balance herself from falling off, she's actually pulling the reins of the horse. This is one of the worst things you can do in rearing, and I've not experienced this myself, but I've seen this happen on the hunt field where a horse went up with a man and he was out of balance. So he leant back, pulled on the reins, because it's instinctive for us to keep ourselves upright. But in doing that, he pulled the horse off balance, and that's the most likely way you're going to pull a rearing horse over. So the position of the woman on the right is much better. So her hands are up and forward, and she's really leaning into the rear itself. So she's putting all her weight forward. Now, I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how to prevent a horse from rearing altogether and how you combat that issue. Obviously, we don't want a horse to rear, but if you ever do find that yourself in that situation where your horse goes up, again, don't resist it. As soon as he's going to go up, if you resist it, you're going to be out of balance because you're not expecting it, and you're going to start falling back, and then to try and recover yourself, you start pulling on your hands. Worst thing that you can do. You want to push your hands up the neck of the horse, push your upper body onto the neck of the horse. And I've had situations where I've put my head as far as over the shoulder of the horse. Anything you can do to get the weight of the horse down. If you're particularly agile or you're a little bit braver, you can put your hand up onto the higher part of the neck of the horse and put your weight like down onto the head, which will just force some weight into their upper body over and down onto their shoulders, which should encourage them down. Now, if you have a horse that's like problematic with rearing, horses rear for all sorts of reasons. It can be napping. Largely, it is something that they nap with, or if they're saying no. And often the rears get bigger and bigger because over time they realize that rearing is something that enables them to avoid a situation or to evade what they're being told to do. So a really good trick to prevent a horse from rearing, if you feel, I don't know if you ladies have ever experienced it, when they start to want to go and they start popping, and that's the sort of threat, is when they start popping. And often they're almost testing the grounds a little bit, because if they start popping, if you, for example, are riding a horse on a hack and he stops, plants, doesn't want to go, you start saying, come on, we're going to go forward, and then they start, instead of going forward, they're napping and they start these little rears. If you then back off as a rider and you think, oh, well, I'm pressing him and now he's going to rear, that horse has just learnt that he can do that to get out of what he needs to do. So a really good way to which is not what we want him to go down that road. So a really good way to combat this is actually to turn the horse very, very sharply. So a horse whose head is bent and the neck is bent. So when I don't know if you ever see when often physios do it and they do like the flexion or the flexion test and they get the head round, a horse can physically not rear when his head is bent, when his neck is bent to that sort of nice rounded shape. So what I always look for if I feel that popping sensation is I ask for flexion. And as soon as I've got some flexion through the neck and that horse turning, I then engage the hind end and push the horse on, like really get them engaged and going forwards so they'll turn. Now you can then recover your aids on the turn. I know this is like maybe a little bit complicated to explain over a webinar, but the point is if you find yourself in that rearing situation, the turn is a really, really good way to go, where you can recover your leg aids, get the horse listening to you, and then try and press forward again. But horses cannot rear if they've got the bend through the neck. So that's a really good piece of advice that again, it's something I find really startling. A lot of people don't realize because it's quite simple and it's a really strong preventative.
It is really interesting because I've had a horse for 4 years who is quite nappy and will rear. And I think it was 6 months ago that I learnt that. And I was so grateful. And I was told it. I said, why? For 4 years have I been struggling? And no, because it works every time.
The turning,
every time. And why do people not tell you that?
Turning, and then ultimately is having a good forwards aid. And I always think to almost you get out of any situation, which I'll probably bring up in every step we go through in this, but is like forwards, getting the horse going, getting them in front of your leg, because again, like rearing, like you said, it's napping, it's backing off from the leg. So getting the turn to re-engage the horse, get yourself a bit of confidence and control, and then forwards energy. How did if you could give us, just for your own example, how that went with that particular horse and how he is now?
Unfortunately he's injured now, but using that technique, he couldn't rear, so he didn't rear, so he did something else instead, went round in a circle and then carried on walking. Even if we have to go around in a circle and then a bigger circle, and then he maybe does it again, but then we, at the end of the day, he's actually still moving forward because I've asked him to move forward. And
that's exactly, and that's all you need, is you just need to recover that forwards that
Yeah.
forward. There are some, I mean, there are some very old school techniques. I've never had to resort to them, but there's the egg technique. I don't know if you've heard about this one.
I've heard about that one. I'm not sure that one.
Yeah, the egg technique. I've never required it because honestly, whenever I've dealt with a rearing horse issue, the turning tends to combat it. But I know a lot of trainers will take an egg, and when the horse rears up, they'll crack the egg on the top of the head of the horse. And the idea behind it is that the horse thinks it's hit his head and that it's blood trickling down. But I don't know how much I mean, if it works for some, it must work, but mustn't be too nice to clean up after.
No, I think I'd be good at turning.
Yeah, and imagine I'd fall off trying to aim the egg properly. We'll stick with turning, yeah.
Great. Are there any questions for the rearing, or is there anything?
Yeah, do feel free to type in the Q&A, guys. If there's something that comes up, a situation that you've had, and you think, how could it have gone better? Please put it in, because this is all about answering your questions and making it easier for you next time. So yeah, type away. We'll continue, but if there's any questions, we'll come back to them. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so the buck and the bronc. That's a great picture as well, such a good angle. You've done such a fabulous job, ladies, with these slides. Honestly, they're brilliant photos. Reminds me of like the Thrills and Spills videos. I don't know if anybody used to see those.
Yeah.
Good old Thrills and Spills. But yes, okay, so bucking and bronking. Obviously, there's all different ways that horses can like buck and bronc for us. They can be the all four legs in the air, the cat leap, or like the little broncs that go on for a long time. There's generally always one solution, and this is to get your horse in front of the leg. So obviously, when you're actually, if your horse goes into a buck, what you want to do is you really want to sit back in the saddle. But there's something really key here that I know I keep hammering on, but this is where it's really relevant, that there's almost got to be a looseness to the way that you're riding. And that might seem really contrary to what we're always taught. I was always taught for a buck, you sit back and you like brace against it. And certainly you do need to sit back, but you almost need to suspend yourself, take a bit of weight out of the saddle, because if when your horse is bucking, if your bum is really in that saddle and really sat, and then they go into a bronking episode, and you're rigid, you're going to be really feeling that movement. So you're almost better, if you can, to take a little bit of weight out of the saddle, in the same way that I know it's not a very conventional thing to do, but if people at home know what a rising canter is, often you see the show jumpers do it. Just taking your weight out, suspending yourself out of the saddle, you can almost get to a point, especially with bronking, where you're disconnecting yourself from the buck, and you can really concentrate on re-engaging that horse behind and sending them forward. Something I would also, for static bucks, something that I would say is, don't try and necessarily hold yourself with your reins. Lean back and almost allow the horse to put his head down and go forward, get the buck over with, and then pull the head back up. Something that, I mean, ultimately, you can't win a tug of war with a horse. So if a horse is really going to throw his head down, and often if you see a lot of falls that come from a static buck, the horse will pull the rider out of the saddle because they took the head down, and then the buck that follows then like bounces the rider out. So you're almost better, there's a bit of a trick to it, but you're almost better to let your reins go, let the horse get its head down, but without that pulling you out of balance, staying in balance, staying up, and then taking yourself a little bit out of the saddle so that you're not getting that full force of the buck when it comes. And I know it's very easy to say that when, again, over a webinar, but if people can think about these things, or if they're experiencing a buck or a bronc, it's something that, you know, if it helps them a little bit, hopefully it might. If it helps one person, I'm happy. That's what I was going to say.
But, Georgia, the technique you said about, is it turn on the four, where you're turning them? Could that possibly be useful in this situation, if you can feel it coming as well, or was that really only for the rearing?
No, it definitely could. I mean, again, if you can get a horse to really bend through the body, I think with bucking and bronking, you'd really need to get a full bend through the body for it to be as effective. But absolutely, like getting the horse to spin, and it's anything, a lot of these things, whether it's rearing, whether it's bucking or bronking, they're generally always ovations, unless it's like an outburst of excitement, which I have to say, I've had horses that will get a bit excited and have a bit of a bronc. And that's how I've always dealt with it. I've like, let them have their head, kept my leg on, as long as they're still reacting to my aids, taking myself out of the saddle, let them get it out of the system, and then it's done. But that's very different from a horse that's bronking or bucking as an evasive technique, or because it knows, right, I'm going to chuck off my rider now, or it's something I don't want to do. And so if that's the case, you definitely do need to find solutions to re-engage the horse and get him actively listening to your aids. So circling would be a really, really good point. So that's a really well made point. And I think also a lot of the time the horses, when they're doing these things, they go rigid in their own body and they take the bit in their mouths. So not just turning, but really achieving a true soft flexion. So getting the horse off the bit, releasing the tension through the mouth and softening them in front. Lateral movements are fantastic, you know. There's a lot that can be done to just re-engage the horse, and it's quite difficult because there's so many different contexts under which a horse would sort of have a buck or have a bronc, and that may be quite controversial. I don't think all of those situations require reprimanding, but certainly if your horse is giving a buck or a bronc and it's not just like a little bit of excitement or playfulness, if it's coming from any other place, I would always back up. Once you've sat through it, back it up with like a little bit of whip, a little bit of something behind the leg, sending them forward, because there does have to be a consequence for them. Otherwise, they're not going to move forward. They're not going to go forward thinking, oh, I can't have done that. And I know that's maybe a little bit challenging for people to sometimes hear, but certainly I think that's quite an important thing, is to back up, like little tap down the shoulder or a little tap behind the leg, either way, just to make it quite clear that that's not acceptable behavior.
So because I was always taught, like, pull the heads and kick them on.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting to hear that it makes a lot of sense to let the rein go a little bit so that you can stay more stable.
Yeah, and
so
then you should pick the head up. But
yeah.
if the horses, I've had it where I've been trying to pull the head up and they've countered me, pulled me down, gone for the buck, and then I just get flung. I've been just completely flung off over the front end, because ultimately, especially if you're riding something 16-2 upwards, you can't always, and no matter how strong your core is, you can't outweigh a big animal. So I think it takes them a little bit more by surprise. Like when they push themselves and their head down, if you're already braced against it, you're just going to get, unless you've got really a fantastic seat, you're just going to get flung like this. So it's almost better to let them take the head and then get it back up. And I don't know if, I mean, we'll talk about bolting in a minute, but something I was always taught for a horse that's like rushing is you don't just fix your hand and you don't just pull against, but you give and take and you give and take and you give and take. There has to be a release and a give. You can't just fix against, because if you fix, then the horse is against you and you just create a hardness in the connection of the rein. And the same applies for a buck or a situation. You know, sometimes horses like throw their heads down. If you're just pulling, the horse is just going to pull against you. Whereas if you give and take and give and take, that's how you get some traction, and that's how you actually can get some influence, because ultimately you're not going to outpull a horse, but you can soften him up and bring his head back up and loosen him off that connection, get him off that connection, stop him yanking on it, stop him diving into it and pulling into it, but not by pulling back, but by bringing him back like this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, loads of sense. No, really good. Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe good to make that clarity so people don't just let them canter around with their heads down.
Yeah.
So yeah, bolting horses. These are my favorites. I've definitely been on a few good bolts in my time. I was on a riding holiday once, and this was when I was a very little girl, and my mum had said, oh, she's a really experienced rider, so they put me on a pony that it was myself and the daughter of this riding trekking centre, and we got to go off and have lots of fun. And we were having a gallop, as you do, and one of my reins snapped, and so I was trying to bring the horse back, turning him, and then my other rein snapped, and it took me all the way back to the farm. So
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, wasn't much I could do in that situation. But okay, so bolting horses, main thing is turning. So a bolting horse, it doesn't matter what their trigger is, they're going to look in a straight line and they're going to have their engine firing. That's generally what a bolt is when they go. A bolt can be triggered by a spook, so a particularly spooky horse who just decides to go. It can also be just a very naughty tactic. I've definitely experienced horses that just want to go a certain way, want to go home, or perhaps we're on a gallop track and they know to gallop. You're trying to keep them and they decide to go. So again, I think the idea of just yanking against them and pulling is you're gonna lose in that situation, because you can't outpull a horse, nor should you try. So the real trick to stopping a bolt is to try and get, again, flexion in the head and to get them turning. A really good trick as well is if you can essentially turn them into something. You have to be quite brave to do this, but I've dealt with problem horses that will be on a hack and, for example, bolt to a certain way. And the way I've been able to combat that is getting the horse to turn, even from a gallop, very sharply, but just turn them into a wall so they've got nowhere else to go. So that's certainly for bolting. It's getting flexion through the mouth, flexion through the neck, so not just pulling, but give and take, getting some turning, get a turn, whether it's a spin or turning them into something. That's sort of quite more of a straightforward thing for bolting. And then once you've regained a bit of control, working on loads of transitions and rein back as well. I feel like rein back is something that's kind of underused. Like, a lot of riders are taught, like, teach a bit of rein back for a dressage test, like a few steps of rein back, but then that's kind of it. Like, there's no beyond that in the general riding education. Whereas a horse can walk backwards as much as we can walk backwards. So it could walk backwards around a whole arena. It could walk backwards through figure of eights or bending poles. And it's actually really good for strengthening them through their back. It's something that a lot of physios recommend for, like, rehabilitation or building up top line, is actually like walking back. It's something that's done in a lot of groundwork. I use it a lot in my Liberty. So yeah, getting the horse to really move back, and not necessarily from a hard place from the hand, but just from the right pressure through the seat and the hand. So once you've regained control of bolting, getting a good rein back and just implementing that exercise everywhere you go, little bit, so you've always got a good hand, because ultimately a horse with a good mouth and a soft mouth shouldn't be bolting anyway. So if you've got a horse that bolts, you've got a horse that has capacity to go hard in the mouth, and that's something that, just for general riding, you obviously don't want to see at all.
Thank you.
Okay, here we go. So how can we fall safely? Another fantastic photo. That looks like a jockey there, and they're actually demonstrating quite nicely what I'm now going to talk about. So I do actually do some courses where I get people on a fake horse and teach them how to fall in various different ways and methods and techniques. Now, obviously tonight, for the sake of time, I can't really go through all the different ways, but there's one common core concept that always comes back to, and this is the idea of the tuck and roll. So there's a few main points to the tuck and roll. First of all, if you took your chin to your chest like this and keep it like this, you are reducing your risk of a neck or spinal injury and death by it's over 80%, and this has been proven by research. Just doing that movement like this, you're reducing your risk of a neck or spinal injury by it's significant. And it's there you go, so 85%. There you go. I couldn't remember. I can't remember what the specific thing, but there we go. It's massive. It's massive, and it's something that I feel like everybody could know, and it's a very simple thing to know. So if anybody goes home and wants to, like, anybody takes something away from this, I hope that's what you'll remember. Is like falling is you're going to bring your chin to your chest. That's the first thing about the tuck and roll. The second thing, which we've already had beautifully demonstrated tonight, is this brace. So you've got you're thinking about your neck and your spine. So that's your chin, step one. And then you're thinking about your head and your brain, and this is the brace, step two. So something that a lot of people do when they're falling off, and it's very instinctive and it's in our natural reflex to put our arms out or to try and take the impact through, like, supporting ourselves as we go down. And this is where I'm going to show some exercises, because just practicing getting down, and I'm going to show you a position we're going to try a bit later, curling your spine, chin to your chest, and bracing, and just holding that position and squeezing your body into a ball. So you bring your knees up to your chest and you become a ball. And that position, in almost any direction that we're going to fall, that when I'm training people to fall, in almost any direction that they go, that's the position that we're going to go to. So I'm actually going to get down on the floor and just show everybody. I've got my lovely friend here who's offered to take over the camera so that she can film me doing that. There we go. And we're just going to go over here. So I don't know can everybody see the floor and see me?
Yeah. Yes, we got that. Perfect.
All right, so if everybody can do this, I would be a very, very happy woman and feel like I've made a big difference to people. Every night before bed, you get down on the floor, and whenever you've got 2 minutes, you don't need very long to do it. You're just going to take your chin to your chest, tuck and roll. And it's just that, it's very simple. And you can rock a few times, so you get a sensation of movement in that position, and it takes a bit of tension in the abs, and you want to feel that your spine is curling. I don't know if that's clear with my hoodie on. Is that clear or not?
Yeah, it looks clear. Show us again.
I'll do it a few times.
So I'll just stop share, Heidi, so we've got a bigger screen.
Oh yeah, hold on. Yeah, I'll just get rid of the
yeah,
slides. There we go. Bigger.
That's a bit better. Don't know if we can come a little bit closer. So if you go that way, that's fine. There we go. Right. Okay, so you get down, sit on your bum, nice straight back at first. Then you take your chin to your chest, arms in your brace, and then knees up. Oh, my head's a bit close to my wall, so I'm going to go forward. Chin, brace, roll. And you just hold it. And it's quite difficult because it takes, your abs are working, your abs are contracting, because you're holding your body together, chin down and like this. And you can rock a few times. And it works your core muscles. It works all the way through your core, all the way up your spine. And then you roll back up. And it's a very, very simple exercise. But when you're falling off a horse for your tuck and roll, that's the position that we're always looking to go into, is in that little ball. And I don't know if we can go back to that slide, but you can see that's where the jockey has tried to go to.
Yeah, I'll just grab that one back.
Thank you, Flo.
There you go. Can you see that again?
Yeah, yes, fantastic. So you can see, I mean, we can't see super clearly, but the knees are up. You can see that the elbows have come up to where his head is. And the horse looks like not in the best position there. But for people watching, the tuck and roll, whether you're falling off to the side, falling off over the shoulder of the horse, coming out at the back, or going forwards, is particularly actually going forward. So rotational falls are obviously extremely dangerous, and if you have a rotational, you're statistically much less likely to have a positive outcome. So for a rotational in particular, this idea that you bring your head down and curl your body forward is actually extremely, extremely important. Because if you think about what happens in a rotational, the horse goes down in front of you and you as the rider get thrown forwards towards the floor. And so the natural thing to happen is for the chin to go up and the head to come down and you to like face plant.
Yeah.
The problem then is that if the horse continues to roll, the horse then comes up over you. So your body's essentially, it's a bit grim to describe, but your body's essentially being bent in the wrong direction. And that's where you see, you know, sadly, the fatal injuries, you know, the fatalities. That's where you see the, you know, people seeing life-changing spinal injuries. That's what essentially happens, is that the horse has gone forward in a rotational, and their natural thing is to go out like this, when actually, even though that's instinctive, is to do this. What we need to do is to do this: forwards, head down, chin down, brace position.
I'm guessing because isn't the head something like, isn't it about a third of your body weight? So if you can get that first bit done, I'm guessing gravity will take over and will roll you, won't it?
Yes, it will roll. And when I'm training people, for example, for the rotational, we train essentially like a forwards roll, like a dive roll. And this is where I think full training as a concept is so important. And I would love more equestrian institutions to sort of pick up on these training techniques, because, you know, the BHS, the Pony Club, they have such strong influence. And actually, there's, you know, fantastic research done by some brilliant universities that supports all these techniques, and they really do have significant impacts on what the outcomes of these kind of accidents can be. So yes, rotationals, like you say, almost like going into like a forwards roll, but again, it's always this idea of doing this. For tuck and roll, whether you're being darted out to the side, you might be thrown to the side, but going like this, you're going to protect your shoulder, you're going to be protecting your internals, because the more you ball up, the more you're protecting all your vital organs, your spine, your neck, and your brain. So there's really like a combination of factors there. And then something that I've seen actually is, so when I was learning to fall, it's something that I was told to do is like every night before bed, you get down and you do the tuck and roll, and you get down and you just practice that position. And what it does is it does build your core. It's like an ab exercise. So for that reason, it's really important that we do all practice this, because it can, I don't want to put out any statements that are like, this will change your life, but certainly there's a lot of evidence there to support that it can have fantastic outcomes if you do this. But the stronger you are and the better your core is, the more that's going to come into play. But also what we're trying to do is bring in this idea of muscle memory. So that's why I think it's interesting, Heidi. I know we spoke a little bit about the falling,
Yeah,
but and like you said, and then you had the fall. But what's difficult is we can talk about this, but we've got naturally hardwired instincts to protect ourselves. And in order to overcome those instincts, you have to retrain your mind and retrain your body to know what's safe. And the tuck and roll is in every way opposite to what we instinctively do. We put our arms out, we instinctively try and land on our feet, we instinctively try and hold on. And this is the opposite. This is let go of the outcome, protect yourself. And so you really have to make that become muscle memory. And that's why I think the little repetitions, a little bit every night, just a little bit of almost like meditation, falling off, this is what I'm going to do. But if you do it consistently, then with time, you're actually training your body how to cope with that situation. And if you did it a little bit, maybe a few months down the line when that fall comes, your body will play its role, because ultimately we are built to survive.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. It's kind of chicken and egg, isn't it? Because you've got, well, I did a few things wrong when I fell off. The first one was trying to stay on.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I remember one of the last things I do remember is trying to winch my reins back to pull myself back on.
yeah,
That actually is the last thing I remember because I knocked myself out. But in doing so, I became really tense, which is
yeah,
my first crime, I guess.
yeah,
And the next is because I was so tense, by the time I fell, I was just rigid, I guess.
rigid, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so there was no relaxation, there was no muscle, like you say, no muscle memory because I'd not practiced anything.
yeah.
And yeah, and so clearly it ended pear-shaped. As did my wrist, which I don't know if you can see.
Yeah.
That's a
Okay.
previous one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, but
So
yeah,
yeah.
if you go and start practicing the tuck, and there's a few other elements to falling, and the first one which you've very nicely highlighted is the reins. So having, and this is where mindset and letting go and almost having some acceptance that, okay, I'm going out the back door, let go, and let's get this over and done with in the best possible way. So let go with the reins, because it could be, you know, situations where if your horse is struggling with over a fence, or if it's gotten itself into a bad situation, if your horse is tripping, the best thing you can actually do for your horse in that situation is to give him his head and let him sort himself out. If you're on your way out, get out of there, but letting go of the reins, getting into your tuck and roll. But then also something we train, and it's something when I say about the rocking, is learning to roll away from the horse, because obviously you want to fall, but you don't want to land under the horse's legs. And also there can be, in some contexts, the horse might also be falling in like around or with you. So it's getting really clear of the horses. Again, it's something that for anybody who's watched racing, you'll see the jockeys, they'll like bounce onto the ground in a ball and then they'll like either roll away or that kind of thing. And so getting into that position and then rolling is something that is part of the tuck and roll technique. But the main thing that I want people to take away from this webinar is that simple: chin, brace, knees up, rolling of the spine, tight. And it's simple, but it makes a very, very big difference. And like the slide says, you got to practice it until it becomes second nature. And even for myself, it took a very long time for it to become just something that I wouldn't have to think about. But now I just get out of there. Touch wood, I've not been hurt yet. Touch wood.
Oh, fabulous. That's really good to hear. What if anybody's got any questions about the situation they were in and what they could do if it came up again, perhaps, or if they want to check in on something that they did and get Georgia's experience on it, please type away in the Q&A section. And just while you do that, it's interesting reflecting, having heard now about the things to leave, to drop, and the things to start doing. My first big fall as an adult, I put my right arm out and I locked my elbow. And, yeah, and I thought it was a break at the time, but I've had a scan recently and they told me that actually I dislocated and it relocated my shoulder.
Ooh, wow.
They found the impact, the dent, basically, where my humerus went up, and yeah. So
you realised it at the time.
Yeah, don't do it. Yeah.
No, anything where you're putting limbs out, like that limb is that, like, our limbs are not made to take the full force of any impact. And if you think, if your body weight is coming down from a height, your arm is not meant, even your leg, like a single leg isn't meant to take that. If you just imagine like jumping, most people will be sat, I'm sure, at like their kitchen tables or something like that. You imagine looking at your kitchen table or your kitchen unit and jumping off it and landing on one leg. Just that sounds horrific to me. I wouldn't want to put my one leg through that. However, when we're coming off a horse, we're coming down from that kind of height, often with the added speed that the horse was traveling at. And if you put a leg out or if you put an arm out, that's the kind of, if you think how savage that kind of impact you're actually putting on that single limb, it's inevitable that you're going to do some damage.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, we've got a question coming through. Do you want to stop share and then we can see Georgia's lovely face while we... So Kathy has asked, what about body protectors or air vests? They are so restricted that they may stop you bending your spine enough to get into the best position. That's a really good question.
That is a fantastic question, actually. I will say straight away, I've not looked into like any specific research on this. So anything I say about this will be my personal opinion and people can take it at face value, but I'm not prepared to say, yes, it's better with or without body protectors. I've personally, so I always would wear body protectors, for example, for going cross country or anything with like solid fences and that kind of thing. But I've always avoided body protectors on that very basis, that I find it is very restrictive for my riding, and I find it impedes my riding and my connection with the horse. I suppose it's something that is it is a personal preference. There definitely are some body protector brands that I think would offer the flexibility that you can still move. And certainly when I have had body protectors in the past, often they're not that close to your body. Like there's often like a little bit of room there. So I would argue that actually if you've got a body protector and you can practice these exercises, I'd practice it with the body protector on. And actually that's going to make you have to use your abs even more, because you're going to have to, you know, contract with the body protector on. But yeah, it's not something I'm going to say, yeah, you're better with or without. I think wearing riding hats, wearing body protectors, they're only going to make you safer, but they're not necessarily essential. But yes, I would say it wouldn't be a bad thing to wear one. But if you do, I would practice your tuck and roll with the body protector on, because that's obviously going to change how it feels. And if there is rigidity or if it offers some restriction, you're going to have to feel that out. And maybe just not be quite as tight in your ball when you're doing that.
I'm now going to have to take my body protector to bed with me in the evening.
Chris is going to love that.
But yes, but
it's
that.
Sorry, go on.
The ones I've got Race Safe, and I think there's other makes that are similar, but they are actually much more bendy than the original ones were, and some of them that are sort of just in solid pieces. I've always worn a body protector ever since I fractured a vertebrae years and years ago, before anybody else started wearing them. So I think they are something you just get used to, aren't they? If you do it all the time, you get used to it. But you're right, I do need to take it to bed in order to practice my tuck and roll.
And I know that like at face value sounds like a little bit silly, like I'll take your body protector and practice it, but it genuinely, I really believe in, I know that the falling technique makes a massive difference. And if as a rider you feel safer knowing that you can fall off in a way that is more likely to be safe and less likely to have serious injuries, that is worth putting that time into. And it's worth taking your body protector to bed, or, you know, whether it's when you do if you do a little 10-minute workout, or before you take your dog on the walk, just put it on and get down on the floor, and you just have to do it as I've demonstrated there. It took less than a minute, but just a little bit every day. It doesn't have to be for the rest of your life, but just for long enough until your body's gotten that sensation. And it's something that, you know, a lot of the time it doesn't just have to apply to falling off horses, but I've certainly encountered some situations in my life, or I'm sure all of us have, when you've had those sort of very dangerous or like life and death almost situations, and your body does go into an automated mode of survival, and that's where your body will draw upon what your body knows to be the best thing it can do to save you. And this is where we have to tap into that and teach our bodies that for the riding, that's the safest thing that you can do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it'll feel different if you don't practice it. How are you going to be on the horse with the kit on that you're going to wear? Yeah, exactly. It was a very good point. Thank you for that question.
Go on. Yeah,
I was going to say we've got another question here from Pandora. Hi Pandora. So thank you for these tips. I had a fall on Sunday as my youngster went into canter. He got the wrong leg through a huge buck, which chucked me forward, and then he took off. I wish I'd bailed once I was unbalanced after the buck, but it all happened so quickly. It's hard to have a rational thought process. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly where I was, Laura.
I hope you're okay, Pandora, following that fall. But it's exactly it. We're taught to stay on. So as far as you know it, that's the best thing you can do, is like try and stay in that saddle. But it's interesting that you say retrospectively, it probably would have been the best thing to bail out of there. And not to like push something I'm doing myself, but I am going to be looking at doing these courses where people can come, get on a fake horse and physically practice these falls onto a mat, because I think it is so really helpful to people to know, okay, I can get out of this situation. And just the concept, I think sometimes the concept of just like falling from a height into a ball, just the idea of that sounds really challenging, and that sounds quite scary in itself, but it really isn't that bad. And once you've done your first 1 or 2 falls, everybody's like, oh, that's not as bad as I thought. And it's something that really quickly you build confidence in. So yeah, if people are interested, that's certainly something to look out for that will be coming in the future.
I'm going to be right in front of your queue. Every single one of those. I'll try it again.
Yeah, most definitely. I think my most recent fall was my best, actually, and I need to practice it a bit more with you, because it's interesting, Pandora saying about it happens very quickly, and my most recent one, I had an acceptance that it was going to happen, and it made a like 200% difference in how I went into it. Yeah, so I immediately went, well, close my eyes, chuck, and let's see what happens. And fortunately, Johnny stopped as I fell off, and I just got this. All his bridle came off. I had something left in my hand, and just this picture of him looking at me saying, "Oh, sorry, Mum."
What had happened? Did he like booked or?
Oh no, it wasn't his fault at all. We just got caught on a bit of a branch, and it snapped. And it was in a bridle path that neither Heidi nor I are now riding because it's so overgrown. The next bit was like, I know I'm either gonna hit it and be taken off the back, or I've got to try and duck. And then I just knew I'm going out the front door. So yeah. Well, on that, unless there's any more questions from our lovely, I think we've answered all the questions. Yeah.
That was brilliant, so fascinating. And can you see the screen? So I've just popped back up where you can get hold of Georgia. If you just want to highlight where you are, Georgia, you've got some good stuff out there.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, it's GP_horse trainer. Facebook, it's Georgia Plimbley Horse Trainer, and I've launched a YouTube channel which I'm trying to keep up with, but having a YouTube it takes a lot of work. It was a little bit more than I anticipated, but nevertheless I'm really enjoying doing it. And on the YouTube in particular, there's loads of free tips and advice, training videos and all that kind of thing coming up. So yeah, if anybody's enjoyed this, I would really appreciate any support. Please feel free to go and follow, and I've got lots of things coming up for them to look forward to as well.
Absolutely. I think we might well publicise that falling off clinic. Whenever you put one on, that would be great. Brilliant. And then just to chat about what's coming up in the next few weeks. So I think we said last time we're back to our winter schedule, so lots more webinars most weeks, most Thursdays. So next week we've got Jason Webb, the horse trainer, I think he's done 2 webinars with us before. He's going to come back and talk about how to solve some of your clipping problems, and that's the techniques he's going to talk about are also other techniques similar techniques you could use to help horses with other sensitization problems or desensitization problems. We've got Dr. Andrew Hemmings coming on the 6th of October. He's a lecturer and researcher at Royal Agricultural University, and he's an expert in horse neuroscience, which is just, I always say I'm a psychologist, so it's fascinating, it's brain stuff. And so he's going to talk to us about how to understand our horses' brains and some fascinating information about things like the brains of horses who crib, etc., which is just really interesting. We've got Ali Wakelin coming on the 13th of October. She's going to do her second groundwork webinar, talking about this time particularly moving sideways. And then on the 20th of October, we've got, I'm not sure if it's Charlotte and Camilla, or Camilla, so I put them both in, from Smart Saddles, going to be talking about the benefits of fully flexible saddle technology. So how treeless saddles have evolved. So if you're interested or just a little bit fascinated or want to find out more, then join us for some or all of those.
Oh.
Yeah.
That leaves us with just saying thank you so much, Georgia, and thank you everyone for joining us.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And I hope everybody's enjoyed the webinar.
Absolutely. I'm sure they have. And just as you leave, guys, there'll be a very, very, very short questionnaire. If you could just let us know anything else you'd like to find out about and how you found today, that'd be amazing. And that's it. Thank you. Thanks, Georgia. Lovely to see you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.